two things can exist at the same time. I want to grow, right? And I want to have these things. And I also don't want to be uncomfortable while I'm doing it, right? And so we have to acknowledge that we can be in two spaces at the same time. And that right there can be conflicting because it's like, oh, I want this, but I don't want to have to do this to get it, etc. And so I would just encourage people to think about what it is that they want and what they are willing to do to get there.
Welcome to Let's Get Real, a candid conversation series about leadership, impact, and what it really takes to show up with purpose and authenticity. Today's conversation is titled Rooted in Purpose, Leading Change with Compassion, Strategy, and Wellness. Our guest is Valerie Pogue, also known as the VP of Wellbeing. Her guiding belief is simple yet powerful. I help people live well and be well in the spaces and places they occupy. Welcome, Valerie, to the Let's Get Real Candid Conversations. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm really excited about this conversation. We're going to be talking about wellness. And my first question for you is, how has your background in public health and nursing shaped the way you support communities?
Great question. So, I tell people I got into public health accidentally on purpose. And I was originally going to school for something else and ended up finding public health and loving it. And most people don't have a clue what it is, but it's literally the health of the public. It's any and everything that you can think of that impacts individuals and communities. And so when I'm working with people, whether it's at the individual level or the community level or a team level, I'm able to just remember those basic principles, right, related to public health and what it is that I want to be able to help people with. So it's really a strong foundation that allows me to kind of do any and everything.
Nice, great. I love that definition of public health. I hadn't thought about it like that. But I love, to your point, it's touching everything, hands down. Yeah. So what role does wellness play in how you care for or advocate for others?
I think the question is more so what role is it impacted by wellness, right? Because everything that I do, I always try to lead by example. But, and if I can derail just a little bit, when we talk about this area, right, we typically say wellness, right? But wellness really is just the physical aspect, right? So that is making sure that we're eating right, we're getting enough rest, that we're going for our preventative screenings and things like that. But really the term should be well-being, right? Because that's the umbrella, that's overarching. And wellness is really just one of the pillars. So, well-being, again, much like public health for me, is that foundation. And so when I think about the fact that when I'm working with individuals or teams or communities, it's really about all of the things that impact who that person is, right? So I have to think about, the spiritual aspect, the physical, the intellectual, the career, the emotional, environmental, social, cultural, you name it. There's so many things. And so when I remember that I'm not just looking at this one area that's in front of me, but there's a holistic concept, it really helps me to lead and to work with people in a much better way.
So I like how you broke that down for me just now, because I just learned something. So well-being is the overarching, and then wellness
Absolutely.
is one of the pillars that are underneath well-being.
Mm-hmm.
What are what would you consider the other pillars that are under well-being in addition to wellness?
Sure. So at one point, I think when we first started changing the narrative in the language, it was like, oh, there's about 6 or 7, but now there's actually 9 dimensions of well-being, which I kind of touched on quickly. But there's spiritual wellness, there's physical wellness, right, which is typically what we tend to talk about when we mean wellness. There's intellectual, there's career, there is environmental, there's emotional, there's social, there's financial, and then there's cultural. I believe that's the 9. It used to be like the SPICES acronym. And so then you have the F, and now they've added in C. And who knows, in the future, there may even be more dimensions of well-being as we just learn more about the evolution of people, right? And what it is that they need to be well.
Interesting. That is so interesting. I think that ties into the thought around, when you think about yourself personally and professionally, and how you need, it touches each. It touches you personally in terms of your well-being, and then also professionally as well.
Absolutely.
And I can attest to that because professionally, when things aren't great, it can definitely impact you. It runs over into your personal life.
And that's how all of them are, right? Most people think of pillars as being individual, right?
Right.
As if they're not interconnected, but they are. Because
Mhm.
if you think about, I don't like my job, we'll go into the career well-being space, right? I don't like what I do, or I don't find purpose in what I'm doing anymore. That's going to impact your socialization with your coworkers or even with your family, right? When you get home, you had a horrible day at work, that's now impacting how you are when you're at home.
Right.
Or if you love your career, but you're not making a lot of money, right? That starts to go into financial well being, which, well, maybe I don't have the ability to go out with my friends as much or socialize, then that impacts that piece, right? So all of them are interconnected. And there are going to be some areas that we feel like we've achieved well being, right? It's like, I don't really need to work on the physicals because I do everything there, but
Right.
maybe my environmental is not great, right? So there's always opportunities to kind of level up in those spaces.
Love that. Thank you. I'm always down for a little bit of philosophy and strategy, higher level thinking to help us understand where we currently are. So, what helps you stay centered when you're offering support or services or resources to others?
So I think one of the things that I remember is I am a resource, but I'm not a fixer.
Mm.
One, because people are not broken. And so I'm not going to be able to do everything as much as we all would love to, right? You don't go into helping professions to not help. But I recognize that there are some things that are going to be above my pay grade. I'm just not going to be able to impact. But I can always make sure that I'm honing in on how whatever it is impacts your well being. And so I just kind of stay in that space. And I always like to say, I help people to navigate the situation, but they're making the changes themselves. They're saving their own lives. They're doing the work. I'm just there to sort of, act as a coach and to assist. And so I just remember, take the cape off. It doesn't exist. You're just here to help and support.
I love that. Love that. What practical steps do you take to bringing wellness to day to day activities?
Gosh, I do so many things, and I think most people are tired of hearing about it because that's the soapbox that I just stay on. But it's in little things, simple as, oh, did you have some water today, right? Staying hydrated and how important that is to our ability to be able to function, right? It gives us the clarity that we need, and it's just good for the body. Or it could be something like, have you taken a break today? Have you sat at this computer all day? Have you stopped staring at the screen and giving your eyes some rest, right? Because what I know is that when we stare at this computer and we sit there all day, and I recognize that our personal and professional spaces, have demands on us, right, to be in front of the computer. But I can tell you that there is a difference between reading an email after staring and being at the computer all day and responding versus, you know what, let me take 5 to 10 minutes, regroup, and then go back and read that email, and it changes your perspective. So I'll
Mm.
talk about little things like that. Have you eaten? Have you been nice to yourself today? Have you connected with someone? So there's so many little ways that well-being can just be infused into our day-to-day activities.
Nice. I love those. I'm taking all of those tips, especially the email one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they can send us sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. How do you help others reconnect with their sense of purpose, especially during times of stress or burnout?
So one of the things I usually like to ask people is, did you choose your position or your career, or did it choose you? And
Mm.
I think that's an important question to ask, because if it chose you, sometimes there's a little bit of a rub, right, with trying to figure out, why am I here? Because I didn't walk into this space. This space came to me. And so you have to figure out, well, if I didn't choose it, why am I making the choice to go with it? Right. And so you have to figure out, how do I align with this? How does it connect with my vision and my purpose?
Mm.
And the same with the other question, right? If you chose it, but it gets hard, or there's days where you're just like, I really don't want to do this, you have to remember your why. You always have to go back to ground zero and say, why did I choose this, right? Why was this the thing that I wanted? And so I think it's always just asking ourselves those two questions, right? And so if I ended up here by happenstance or I purposefully walked this way, why am I doing it? And if you don't have your purpose, it's important for you to figure it out. Or perhaps this just isn't the space anymore, and that's okay too, right? We have to give ourselves room to grow and to evolve.
Nice. Thank you. I love that. Did you choose it or did it choose you? That's a very
Mhm.
interesting question as I think about some of the decisions I've made, or because in the end, there's still a decision being made, right? No matter how,
Absolutely.
right? And so I'm going to reflect on that a little bit in terms of some decisions that I've made over time. Did I choose it or did it choose me? I never thought about it that way. Yeah.
And we're going to experience stressful moments, right? Stress is something that we just cannot avoid, right? And sometimes the stress is going to be motivating, right? If we know we've got a deadline or something that has an end date. And then other times we'll notice that it starts to get chronic. So when you're approaching that compassion fatigue, right? Or if you are starting to feel like everything I do is causing me angst, then we really have to go back to the why
Right.
and say, is this aligning with that, right? Or maybe I have a different why, because that's the thing. Our starting why isn't always our ending why.
Mm,
It changes and it evolves. So it's really important for us to start noticing when this changes how I function in this space, I need to pause and I need to really pay attention and find out if this is the space that I'm supposed to be in. And if it is, and this is just an uncomfortable moment, how can I work through and navigate that space? Because what we don't want is we don't want traumatic experiences. We don't want, the burnout, right? Stress we're going to have, good
right.
or bad, but we don't want people getting to the point where they're just like, I'm not going to be able to do this anymore.
Love that. Thank you. Something that I always think about, I feel like there was COVID, right? And
Mhm.
there's post COVID, I always ask this question, what happened during COVID that we want to keep and what happened during COVID that we want to get rid of professionally? And one of the things that I think that came out of COVID is the focus or the more attention on well-being in the
Absolutely.
spaces of healthcare. And so I'm grateful that COVID happened because of that, because I think
Mhm.
back in the day, pre-COVID, when you talk about well-being, and some of the other softer things, that's what they would call it,
Yes.
soft, right? Like, don't nobody
Yep.
got that.
Mhm.
We're here to take care of patients. No one cares about how you feel. Come in here and do what we need you to do.
That's correct.
And I think that we were in a place of just do, and not concerned about the individual.
Mhm.
So I'm grateful that it is in the forefront. And then I think, but to your point, I think in the dialogue thus far, we've talked about it's individual in terms of how people address it, because we're all
Mhm.
in different spaces and different things resonate with us. And so it's important that we identify what helps us individually. Um,
Yeah, that's important because well-being is individual,
right.
right? And so what I need to be able to do to function and to move forward may not be what somebody else needs to do, right? Or they may have mastered that area. And so they're looking at it, differently. So I always tell people, what is it that you need, right? And how can I help you to meet that need?
Yeah. Great. Thank you. How do you foster collaboration and trust across different roles?
You know, trust is one of those things where I feel like it's an ongoing fostering,
Mm,
right? Because we can trust people as it relates to one situation, right, or one area, but maybe not in all spaces, right? And so I feel like we're always doing that. And I think one of the biggest pieces of fostering that trust and collaboration is communication, right? You have to know who you're working with. I always like to say, who are the people in your neighborhood, right? What are our intentions? What are our agendas? Because we all have them. They're not necessarily all malicious, but kind of need to know what's the common ground. Because
mm,
sometimes, we're teams in name only because we all report to the same person and that makes us a team. But you really have to create teams and partnerships and collaborations, right? It's not just something we say, but it has to be something that we work towards. And so I think it's always important to get to know the people that you're going to be working with, um, to be able to create a psychologically safe space, right, for people to show up authentically, right? Because that's a part of well being. If I can't come into the space as who I am, right, that inhibits my ability to be well, because now I'm having to block off pieces of who I am, right, to be able to fit the space. And so I just think it's creating that, right, having the open dialogue, finding out who is on the team. um, and you'll have to do that, like you'll have to test it sometimes with little things, like you might allow a little bit of your personal information to seep out and kind of see how the room deals with that, and then maybe you start to get more comfortable sharing some other things. But I think when it comes to the professional space, we never want to let people down, and so we're always kind of, putting on this facade to make sure that we're good. But I think you have to communicate, you have to create a psychologically safe space, and all of that takes time. And like I stated earlier, you may have it in one instance, but maybe something happens and you've got to start all over again. So it's something you're always working towards, in my opinion.
I love what she said, Valerie, around trust in terms of like it's complex, right?
It
So
is.
you might trust this individual to, I don't know, pay you on time, but you may not
Right.
trust them with your
Personal information. That's right.
right? And so I
Hmm.
think that that's helpful. I never thought about it in that because it's not that you don't totally not trust someone, but in terms of certain pieces of information or certain
Hmm.
situations, there may
Yeah,
be different levels of trust depending on that
absolutely.
relationship.
Hmm.
Wow, that is
There's
powerful.
levels to everything, right? And I think sometimes we don't want to acknowledge that, because it seems like, oh, we have this wall up and we don't want to let people in.
Mhm.
I don't think that's it at all. It's just, some things are some things weigh more than
Mm,
other things, right? And so, like you said, I trust that I'm going to get this from you, but we've never been in this space before, so I don't know how this is going to play out. And
right.
sometimes people aren't um, betraying your trust, if you will, from a malicious standpoint. It's maybe they're doing their job, right? So it's just something that's constantly evolving, I think.
I love that. That
Yeah.
right there is, I feel like that's some gems right there. Thank you. Thank you. Um, so talk to me about any advice you would offer to women in clinical roles who are navigating demanding environments while trying to grow in their careers.
Mm. Well, I'll say this, and we've all heard it before, it's very cliche, but there is no growth, or there's very little growth without discomfort, right? And so we're going to have some of that rub. I just think it can't be, we're going to have the misalignment at times, right, until we merge and come together. But what we don't want is to have that inner conflict that's really feeling like I shouldn't be here, right? This is really bad for me. But we're going to have that rub. But I think that two things can exist at the same time. I want to grow, right? And I want to have these things. And I also don't want to be uncomfortable while I'm doing it, right? And so we have to acknowledge that we can be in two spaces at the same time. And that right there can be conflicting, because it's like, oh, I want this, but I don't want to have to do this to get it, et cetera. And so I would just encourage people to think about what it is that they want and what they are willing to do to get there, right? Because if you want to be in the C suite, but you're not willing to do C suite activities, and you really have to figure out, is the C suite where you want to be? Or do you just want to have more of a leadership role related to projects or to personnel or whatever it might be, right? But you really have to ask yourself, what do I want and what am I willing to do to get it? And that type of honest conversation with ourselves is hard,
Yeah.
because it's like, why can't I have the reward without the risk and without the rub? You know what I mean? But it doesn't work like that. And so I just, that's one of the questions, always going back to, what's my why? Why am I doing this? Right? Because if we don't have any connection to what it is that we're doing, I promise you're not going to do it long,
Right.
because it's not going to feel, you're not going to feel anything, right? But you definitely won't have that connection to whatever it is. And so, again, figuring out your why, figuring out what it is you want to do and what you're willing to do to get there. And also thinking about, when I have those moments of discomfort, of stress, of challenge, what am I going to do to navigate that? because there's nothing worse than being in the situation and trying to figure out how to get out of it. Now, as nurses, that's kind of what we do, right? We're in the thick of it.
Right.
But it's also great, and I think this is just the health promotion and preventative side of me that says, let me think about it before I get in it. And there's some situations you can't anticipate, but let's say I'm going to have a really, really, really bad day or a challenging day, or this project comes up or something. What's my toolkit to make sure that I can get through this and navigate this successfully? Who's my support system internally as well as outside, right? Because no matter what you do, people who don't do what you do on a daily basis will never understand it, right? So you can go home and say, let me tell you about my day, and this didn't go right and XYZ. But if you don't work in, life-saving fields, people may not understand that, right?
Right.
So I think it's always important to make sure you have that support. And again, just always think about, I'm doing this because of this. I'm doing this because of this, and allow that to kind of be your guiding force, and recognizing that two things can exist at the same time. I want to be here, but I really don't like this part of it.
Right. Right. That I love that in terms of two things happening at once, because I think that
Mhm.
that's life. You know
Yes.
that this is what's best, but this is not comfortable. Or
Yeah.
in my world, sometimes I'm like, but I want it all to be just how I don't want to do that.
Right. And then there's that person, right? And so
Right.
because I want it all,
Yeah.
I am assuming all the risk and the rub that comes with it, and I'm just
I
gonna
don't
deal
want
with
that
it.
part. I don't want that part. That's what I'm
I
saying.
know.
The second part is, and I don't want that part either. So I have to
Right.
I need more time to come to the reality,
Of
to
course.
realize what the reality is sometimes. So
Right. Or lowering the ceiling. I know we talk about the glass ceiling and shattering and that's fine too. But sometimes, and I know I've had to do this, oh, I want to be this. When I get this degree, I'm going to do this. And then you start to get a glimpse of that, and you're like, you know what, let me bring it down some. And that's okay too. You can either shatter the ceiling, or you can say, you know what, we'll bring it down a couple of notches. And
I,
that's okay.
yeah, I agree with that. The ability to be flexible and change your mind. I remember
Yeah.
my mom told me at a very early age, you can change your mind whenever you want. Like,
Whenever you want.
and I think that was probably the best advice she gave me, because it's given me the freedom to say, I don't want to do that no more. And I'm okay with that. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there is some freedom with that. And I want to pause there because I recognize that that's a freedom that isn't equitable, right? There are some people that are like, I really don't have that free, like I have to do, versus no, I get to choose
Right.
what I want to do, right? And so that can be difficult as well. But you do, every day we make choices, every minute of every day. And with those choices do come consequences, some good and some not so good, right? And we have to weigh and balance that out,
Right.
which is part of our well-being.
Yep. Yep. Weigh and balance it, given the information in front of us at the time. Right. And all paths.
Absolutely.
Like, and that's the other thing I feel like with life, trying to remember that I'm making decisions, the best decision in the moment. And then
Yeah.
it's not the right decision, I'm not going to beat myself up about it, because
Yep.
I went through that process, I think. So, um, first of all, Valerie, I want to thank you for joining us, because this space around well-being is not my forte. It's not what I'm interested in, really, but I know
Right.
the importance of it. It is so important that it's part of whatever we do as professionals. And so I talk a little bit about it in my diamond model, about well-being. And I think the piece that you brought to the forefront during this conversation is that the well-being is spread throughout our personal and professional lives,
Mhm.
and that we've got to
Absolutely.
make sure that that well-being is strong in both spaces. And if not, how do we get it to those places where it's strong in both? Because
Absolutely.
there is an intersectionality between the two. So,
Yeah.
thank you for dropping those nuggets. Is there anything else you want to share before we end this conversation?
I just want to echo your sentiments and say thank you for allowing me to be on Let's Get Real. And I appreciate your honesty, right? You're like, it's not something I'm interested about, but I know that it's important, right? And a lot of times we will say, well, I'm not interested in it, so I want no parts of it. But we recognize that it's paramount. It's taking over, it's in every space and place that we can think about. And I know, especially in the workforce, at one point when people were leading and managing and supervising, it was related to time,
Mm,
making sure that people were doing what they needed to do. But now I'm having to manage emotions too,
mm, mm.
right? And so that's a brand new space for a lot of people that are in charge of people, right? And it's like, what do I do? And so these conversations, these platforms are really, really important because it isn't going anywhere. And it's all about integrating, you know, the tactical part that I know to do in terms of managing people. And then,
Mhm.
like you stated earlier, the softer part, right? The softer skills. And so I just thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk about something that I am so passionate about.
I'm so glad you're passionate about it because, like it says, candid conversations. I'm very transparent about what I do and I don't, but that
That's
doesn't mean
right.
it's not important just because I do or don't like it.
Absolutely.
So appreciate you for coming on and dropping some gems as part of this conversation as well. Valerie, if individuals want to get in touch with you or connect with you, how can they do that?
Sure. So if it's okay, they can connect with me on LinkedIn, Valerie Pogue. There's lots of other letters you see. That's how you'll know it's me. But certainly on LinkedIn, I'm always open to connecting with people, and we can certainly take it from there.
Thank you, VP of Wellbeing, Valerie.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone. Have a great
Thank you.
day or whatever time you're listening.